Can you hear me? All right. So in this talk, I'm going to describe how you can use network analysis techniques to actually make sense of social eye tracking data. What I mean by social eye tracking data is several eye trackers running at the same time, recording gaze information, and trying to make sense of this massive data set. So in this talk, I'm going to have 3 sections. So in the first one, I'm going to describe where my data comes from so that you can understand the properties of it. Then I'm going to explain to you one way to build networks based on this eye tracking data. And finally, how you can use those features. How can you actually make something meaningful out of it? All right, so last year I did a study about the effect of a gaze awareness tool on collaborative learning. The idea is pretty simple. I had 2 subjects. Each one of them was in a different room. They were able to communicate with each other with a microphone. And in one condition, they were able to see the gaze of their partner on the screen. That was the gaze awareness tool. In the other condition, they were not able to do that. So they were just talking about their learning task, and that was it. I'm just going to briefly describe this study, but if you're interested about that, I'm going to present that work at CSCL this year. So their task was to analyze a set of contrasting cases. So they had to discover how the human brain processes visual information. So they had 5 cases that you can see here. They had the answer for 2 of those cases, and they had to figure out the answer for the 3 remaining ones. So they had different lesions on each of those diagrams, and they had to match those lesions with the answers on the right. To give you an idea of the task and students collaborating around it, I'm going to show you a short video.
All right, you want to start?
Wait, I see this light blue dot.
Oh, I think that's my gaze.
Oh, cool. That's so bizarre.
I know, this is so weird.
Okay, so I have an answer for lesion 6, which is by the right eye.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking at it right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm looking at it too.
Okay, so the answer is right. You lose the entire right one.
Okay, so the top.
Yes, the top.
Yeah, okay, I have the answer for the, wait, I had, for the furthermost left one.
Okay, where the lesion is in the orange colored thing.
And there's like a, lesion 1.
Yeah.
Okay, and the answer is like top left and top right.
Okay, so that's the...
Yeah.
The 4th one down.
Yeah.
All right. And obviously, the red dot was the gaze of the first person, but she didn't see that during the experiment. I just added it afterwards so that you can see how those 2 gazes are dancing together during the task. And so I'm just going to show briefly some results. So the people in the gaze awareness group, the people who were able to see the gaze of the other person on the screen, they actually learned more from the task. And they also had a higher quality of collaboration. The way I measured collaboration was using a standard rating scheme from the CSCL community, the one developed by Myers and colleagues. It's actually a pretty easy tool to use. You have 8 subdimensions, and you give a score for each group between -3 and +3 on those subdimensions. So I'm not going to describe those results, but I want to mention what those subdimensions are, because I actually use them to build the networks that I'm going to describe afterwards. So you have time management. Did people finish the time on task? Did they have reciprocal interactions? Were they oriented toward the task? To which extent did they sustain mutual understanding? How did they manage dialogue? How do they pool information for the task? Did they reach a consensus at some point? And how did they divide the task? Was just one person doing all the work, or did they actually divide the task and work together for solving this task? One last thing that I need to mention about this study that I'm going to use also for the networks is that the people who were able to see the gaze of the other person on the screen also had more moments of joint attention. And you would expect that because if you have this light blue dot moving around on the screen, you're going to be attracted by it at some point. What's interesting, though, is that this was one of the only measures that I had that was correlated with positive learning gain. All right, so now I'm going to switch gear and actually talk about exploiting the eye tracking data that I had from this experiment. So I actually recorded all the location of all the cases during this task. The first thing that I did was to divide the screen into 45 areas. And then I counted how many fixations I had on each of those saccades. And I used that to build the nodes in my graph. So if you have a very big node from area 12, this is going to show up on the graph. And I did the same thing for the edges. So if you have a saccade between two regions, then your edge is going to be really big. So this is the result that you get. So in orange, you have the answer keys on the right, and in blue, those are the diagrams on the left side of the screen. And you can already see some interesting things, like the person on the left here. You can see that this person spent a lot of time on the answers and comparing those answers with the diagrams in the middle. The person on the right, though, completely neglected those answers and just made comparisons on the diagrams in the middle. So even though it's interesting, the main issue is that every node in the graph is very strongly connected with every other node in the graph, so you end up with hairballs. And the solution that I actually used was to prune the data based on the result that I had in my study. So instead of just using the fixations as the node, I used the number of moments of joint attention that the group had during the activity. So now you have one graph per group instead of one graph per person. So here are the results. So here you see a group with a very low quality of collaboration, and this was actually a group that didn't have access to the gaze awareness tool. On the right, you see a group that had a very high quality of collaboration. And actually, those people had access to the gaze awareness tool. So you can see that those people had a lot of moments of joint attention, and they had a very high focus on area 26 and area 20. I also built a simple web tool to do some data analysis, if that's going to work. Yeah, the resolution is not that great. But so you can see that some graphs, they have a lot of moments of joint attention. They're well connected, but that if you want to traverse the whole networks from one point to the other, it's going to be very difficult. It's going to take you a lot of hops. In some other graphs, you have very few nodes. Some of those people didn't have a very good collaboration. They mainly did things on their side without, looking at where the other person was looking on the screen. You have some people who look at the answers a lot, some others who neglect them. This group, for instance, had a good quality of collaboration, and they made a lot of comparison between those areas. So this is the kind of tool that we want to use to make final analysis of what actually happens during the episode of collaboration and try to explain why those networks are the way they are. So this gave us some interesting results. We see variation in those graphs. And now the question is, can we actually use those variations to say something meaningful? So what I did first was to compute straight correlations between those subdimensions that I mentioned before and some network metrics. So here on the left, you can see those 8 subdimensions, and on the bottom, you have the average score for the quality of collaboration. So the first thing that you can see is that the average node size is actually correlated with all those subdimensions. That is a very strong indicator of a good quality of collaboration. And this is not surprising because there is a huge amount of literature in developmental psychology, in the learning sciences, that describe how joint attention is central to any kind of social interaction. What's interesting, though, is that if you look at other network metrics, so for instance, the size of the graph, the number of nodes that you have, or the number of edges, those are just correlated with information pooling, so to which extent the group explored the information that they had to solve the task, reaching consensus. So they didn't only attend to the same thing visually on the screen, they also talked about it, apparently, if they had a higher score on this reaching consensus metric. We found that betweenness centrality was one of the only measures that was correlated with sustaining mutual understanding. So betweenness centrality is a measure of how central a node is on the graph. So it's actually pretty simple to compute. You take every pair in the graph, you find the shortest path between those two nodes, and you add this count to every node, and you repeat this loop for every pair in the graph. Interestingly, the largest node was connected with task orientation. So if you have a huge node, which is a big moment of joint attention on one area of the screen, that means that it seems to mean that both people in the group were actually focusing on the task, and there wasn't only just one person who did all the work. And finally, you find that all the things connected to SCCs, SCCs stands for strongly connected components, actually connected with reaching consensus. So SCCs are actually subgraphs within the graph, within a directed graph, where you can reach every other node in the subgraph. So this table is not that easy to interpret, but what's remarkable about it is that those metrics are sensitive to different things. So it's not like the graph just tells you that there is a good collaboration. It also tells you things about people reaching consensus, people actually trying to help each other, people trying to be oriented toward the task. So what I also tried to do next was to actually use those network metrics as features for a classifier. So this is just a work that I did recently, and I just used SVM to classify people into people who had a high quality of collaboration or low quality of collaboration. So I did a median split, and I was trying to categorize if people would fall in the top category or the low category. And what I found was that for most of those subdimensions, I was able to correctly classify people with a 90-95 accuracy, which is pretty good. Something else that I did was to see how much time do you actually need to make a reasonable classification. So the first activity in this task was 12 minutes long, but maybe you don't need 12 minutes. Maybe 5 minutes are enough to make a judgment about how well people are collaborating. And what I found was that after 9 minutes, you have an 85% accuracy on this kind of prediction. So just to wrap up, so the contribution of this work was to propose visualizations to explore social eye tracking data sets. So you can actually look at networks and trying to find differences between those networks to characterize groups of students. The second contribution was to use the features of those networks to actually be used as proxies for quality of collaboration and subdimensions of collaboration. And the last one was to actually use those network metrics to feed machine learning algorithms to make prediction about how well people are collaborating. In terms of future work, so it's great that you can predict if people are having a good quality of collaboration, but those networks don't actually tell you why people are better at collaborating. So what I want to do next is a more microanalysis of those groups and try to characterize groups that are very high on some network metrics. So for instance, a group that has a very high betweenness centrality, what does that mean in terms of collaboration, in terms of the things that they say while they're analyzing the contrasting cases that they had to use. And something else that I have to do, obviously, is to replicate those results. There may be an issue in my data because I have two experimental groups. In one of them, they had access to this gaze awareness tool. And so maybe my data is divided into those two groups, and I'm mainly doing categorization based on those experimental conditions. That's it. I'd like to thank you, and I'll welcome any question.
actually look at the same thing at the same time.
Yep.
One of the nodes is telling you how many of the same things are looking at the same time. So I guess the arcs are telling you how many saccades they do together.
Yep.
And so then does the path, like if there's a four-length path, I could use the mic, that there's a four-length path between some node and some other node, or the fact that then that you have a graph that's really tightly grouped together versus a graph that's really spread out. What does that tell us?
This is a really good question. This is related to my last slide. So in this work, I've just been using network metrics, but I haven't been doing a lot of interpretations about those metrics. So that's why now I want to tie specific behaviors with specific metrics. So that you don't only look at the graph and you're like, okay, I can make some predictions, but to actually look at how those graphs evolve over time. So you can actually see them evolve. So starting with one node and having another node, and tie very big, big gaps in terms of, plateau, and then there is a very abrupt evolution, and try to tie that with what they say and where they look at the screen at the same time. The issue is that you have to look at the gaze data and you have to look at the transcript at the same time, and you have to synchronize that, and it's not very easy to do, yeah.
So thanks for this work. It was really interesting. I think it's a paper that does something that is really important for this community, which is you spent quite a bit of time looking at the technical aspects of the analytics. And just what I was saying, well, what can we learn from this? You said, well, now I'm going to tell you what we can learn from this. And you started connecting it to other methods of collaboration. And I think that's really important in that we're stretching both down into the details of the data and then up conceptually. So I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit more about the collaboration measures that you were sort of using as validation for the interpretation of what at the very least, the network could serve as indicators of, even if you're not interpreting it directly.
Yep. So the rating scheme works in this way. So you have those 8 rubrics, so those 8 categories, and that at the end of the episode, you give each group a score between -3 and +3 to the group. -3 being that this group was behaving, people were not communicating with each other. The quality of collaboration was very low, and +3 being that they did everything perfectly. And what you do is, so you give this score at the end, and what you usually do is that you have another judge rate all the episodes again, and then you try to have a high inter-judge reliability. And in our case, it was higher than 80–85%, which is acceptable. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, I guess I was wondering if the median analysis, you're looking at the whole population.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah, it's like a global measure of the whole episode.
So I think we have one more paper. This is Pedro Muñoz Moreno. Yeah, is that right? Yeah, okay. He's going to present a paper inferring higher level learning information from low level data for the Khan Academy.